que questões centrais se confrontam as cidades? Qual o lugar da cultura no percurso para sociedades mais coesas e sustentáveis? Impulso, Fórum Político da Artemrede. Debates, entrevistas e conversas com profissionais da cultura, investigadores, autarcas e agentes de desenvolvimento local. De 7 a 11 de junho, nos canais digitais Artemrede.
So hello, we're here at Artemrede's political forum to know a bit about RESHAPE, a Creative Europe funded project in which Artemrede participated, and that is just now coming to an end. The project started well before the pandemic, but it seems to have been thought precisely for a time of colossal change, or at least for a time in which many of us yearn for change, but can't quite figure out how to get rid of the status quo. And these four amazing women here with me are here to help us understand how can we begin to build the changes we want to see in the arts sector. Very, very shortly, you can read their biographies later on the website. So I will be chatting with Milica Ilic, Maria Flahu, Aniko Hatz, and Marta Kyle. I'm sure I've mispronounced partly her name, but I did my best. I mean, they're all art workers, and they're all been involved in a number of relevant organizations and projects. So I'll just make a brief note around their current post and capacity. Okay, you can, as I told you, their biographies will be on the website. So Aniko is an arts manager working at Sin Arts Center in Budapest, where she is in charge of international relations, and she's also involved in coaching. Maria is a culture manager and a museologist, and founding member and executive director of Acesso Cultura in Portugal. Marta is a curator and a researcher, interested in institutional critique and alternative transnational modes of working, and currently running the Performing Arts Institute in Warsaw, Poland. And finally, Milica has specialized in transnational cooperation. She currently works at ONDA, the French Office for Performing Arts Circulation, where she coordinates RESHAPE. And it is inevitably with you, Milica, that I will begin with. I'd like to ask you to offer us 2-minute summary of what RESHAPE consisted of. I know it is a complex project and therefore a difficult task, but what is the basics that we should know?
Yeah, it is a complex task. It's also, I have to warn you that there is nothing objective about what I'm going to say, because the subjective experience of the other women around the table is as valuable as what I'm going to say. Mine is informed by a perspective of the coordinator, so it's a specific one. Just bear this in mind while I say these things, and then you will get a more complete picture with everything that we're going to say in the next minutes. What I can say about RESHAPE is that it's an experimental and a bottom-up project that seeks to rethink and reinvent organizational models of the art sector. It was initiated by a group of intermediary structures, organizations from around Europe and Southern Mediterranean that all share a mission of supporting the art sector in their own environments, in their own countries, in their regions. And as such have a global overview of the art sector that they serve. So this is the group of people that kind of started the thinking around RESHAPE. The sparkle somehow, the idea that made this group of organizations initiate this project is an analysis that sees our sector, the art sector, as deeply immersed in ways of working that are not sustainable. And by this, I mean that our societies, the economic, political, social, ecologic context that we act in have evolved tremendously. The artistic practices have evolved tremendously. And the question that we need to ask ourselves, or we wanted to ask ourselves, is how we can reimagine our ways of working. How can we reimagine the tools and instruments that we give ourselves as a sector to do this? Mm-hmm. And how can we as a sector secure our own survival and our thriving by being perhaps more in tune with society and with the evolving artistic practices? So that's the initial kind of idea. Now, what is important to put on the table very quickly when talking about reshape is that the central premise of it is that this conversation has to be led by actors from the ground. So cannot be led by or solely by the institutions or the intermediary structures or the organizations, but has to be led by artists and art workers on the ground who are already experimenting with alternative models and testing them out. Mm-hmm. So reshape is this experimental process in which these artists and activists from the ground, from all over Europe and Southern Mediterranean, come together and basically work as innovation experts to propose joint, radical solutions that are concrete, that are sustainable, and that are realistic for the challenges of the sector.
Mm-hmm. It was and seems a huge and thrilling task. I know that you had to organize more or less the starting points in topics in that you call trajectories. Can you give us an overview of all the trajectories that were involved, especially because we don't have, because due to time limitations, we don't have members of all the trajectories that were involved here in this conversation. So maybe you could tell us a bit, not so much about the prototypes, but how did you select those topics? It was the minimum organization that you suggested to the participants.
Yeah, there were 5 topics that were, or 5 major challenges of the art sector today that we put on the table. These were extremely broad somehow and very much interconnected. And they were art and citizenship as the first one, fair governance models and a fair way of organizing in the art sector, the value of art in social fabric, the solidarity funding that we initially proposed, which was later on transformed by the group into solidarity economies, and how solidarity can be kind of infused into the funding and economic schemes of our sector. And then transnational and post-national, or transnational or post-national artistic practices. These were the 5 topics. Now, intentionally or on purpose, when we proposed these topics, we didn't really define them very precisely, because the idea was that the participants, the reshapers, these innovation experts that we were working with, that they would take the topics and then refine them, refocus them, reshape them in a way that they feel is most convenient. And also opening the possibilities for overlaps to happen or not happen, whatever the groups feel like should be the evolution of the project. Mm-hmm. And indeed, overlaps happened somehow naturally. Also, shifts in perspective happened somehow naturally, and that was anyway the intention. I think that these 5 topics was somehow maybe an artificial framework, but it was a necessary one to start from, or at least from our perspective, it was a necessary one to start from somewhere. Now that the project is coming to its end, it is clear that a lot of it is so complementary that we're not really kind of speaking about 5 trajectories anymore. These are really kind of ideas that come together and complement each other in the entirety of the project.
Mm-hmm. it seems like a puzzle. When I had a brief contact with the project right at the beginning, and now it seems seems like a puzzle. That when it's complete, it's probably a plan to change the world. So it's quite overwhelming as well. I mean, it's my understanding that you were involved in the project, not only as project coordinator, but right from the beginning in its conception and the funding proposal. I'm curious if I can ask you to travel back in time and tell us what has surprised you most. I mean, the pandemic is not a viable answer for all of you. but if you can think back when you were reaching out to possible partners, imagining how to make an open call, etc., and see where you are now. What have been the biggest surprises?
Yeah, I think first I would like to say that RESHAPE in its process and in its evolution is a highly collaborative thing, a highly collaborative matter, and that is not a surprise, that we know, and it's also quite an open. A lot of it was kind of open-ended, and it was left open-ended on purpose in order to make it possible for the project to reshape itself. Because we started off with a group of partners, but then the essence of it was bringing together other people and kind of making sure that these other people are working together to make this happen. And so the only way that somehow all of us together found to make it possible was to be a community. And a lot of the work around RESHAPE was kind of making it possible for what is now 60 plus or 70 plus actors to kind of be community together and to engage in common decision making and to reflect about these formats and to adapt them and shift them into what they feel is appropriate. And all of that is not surprising. I mean, all of that is also quite at the heart of the project. And including the joy and the complexity of coming together and coming together from such different contexts. And by that, I don't just mean geographic contexts, although it is that as well, but also such a variety of contexts of organizational contexts, of contexts of work. A lot of the people are independent artists or are coming from the independent sector, but some of them are also coming from a more institutional sector. A lot of the partners that are involved are also coming from a very institutional setting, and all of these different hierarchies come into play. What was surprising for me is the extent of time and energy that is necessary in order to build and continuously build trust and reaffirm trust across the different power relations that exist, and how necessary it is to decompose these deeply rooted power relations and the habits that we kind of even on an individual level take, you know, from the heritage of these power relations. In particular, when it comes to the relations between artists and independent artists, independent art workers, and the institutions. That was, I mean, to some extent, we knew it was out there, but the depth of it and the extent of it was surprising.
Thank you. It's quite a learning point there, very honest. The time and energy to build trust. I think I want to get back to that open-ended format, but maybe I'll move on to our other guests, and I'll make a note to ask you something about that open-ended format. Maria, maybe you the first thing I want to ask you is about the experience of having been a reshaper. I've tried to translate this into Portuguese, but I couldn't. So that's the first thing. I think it's important that we don't only focus on the project's topics or results, but also in the process, especially having in mind what Milica just said. So how was it for you, the experience of being a reshaper, to work with a group of people that you didn't know before and deal with such a huge task on your shoulders?
Thank you, Vanya, and thank you all. It's great to see you again. I think that our first meeting was in Lublin, Poland, and by the end of those first days, I started feeling so lucky and privileged to be able to be part of that project. It immediately became obvious to me that this would be a great, rich, professional and personal experience, and it actually was. It was exactly that. We were very lucky in our group. I was in the arts and citizenship trajectory or tragedy, and there was an immediate match among the members of the group. We didn't know each other at all, and that immediately there was some kind of empathy and an interest and curiosity to know the other members of the group, and that was obvious from the beginning. And then there was such a richness in the discussions and the experiences and the readings each one of us was bringing to the group in our conversation. It was not clear, perhaps in the first 2 or 3 meetings, where we were heading at. We had to remind ourselves that something concrete would have to come out from this. But we were so pleased, so enthusiastic about the possibility of getting time off and actually turn this into a practice, into what we do, taking time off just to be with other people, think with other people, talk with other people. I think that if the challenges were the normal challenges of, you know, people who don't know each other coming together, having to find a way of working together, respecting each other rhythms and methods, and finding a way of working together. I think that there was not a bigger challenge or other challenge than this. And just to conclude, I think after having said all this, it's that I actually feel that this experience had an impact, a real impact in my professional practice, and that's something I'm truly grateful for.
Well, I know that you already said that you were a member of the art and citizenship trajectory, but let's leave that behind, because your group was headed towards founding a Department of Civil Imagination. When I was reading through it, a lot of it seems to be about using the imagination and learning current practices to be able to move towards a logic of care, which, as you know, is something very close to my heart. I mean, that we care for each other as workers and as people. Can you tell us a bit about the ways in which this Department of Civil Imagination challenges current ways of working in the art?
Well, first of all, to say that the Department of Civil Imagination is a fictional department. It's an open space. People can come in. Nobody owns it. And it aims to use civil imagination as a resource to actually reshape, that's it, to radically reshape our practices and both, realities, both in practical ways, but also political ways and even poetic ways. I think that if we want to consider how we want to challenge the field, I think that the functions within the department, or the positions within the department, and the names we gave to them might actually give a clue as to what we would like this to actually contribute to. For instance, we have the Chief of Hospitality, we have the protector of fairness, we have the commissioner of defiance, we have the leader of love, we have the care supervisor, we have the manager of liberation, we have the unmasters of wishful thinking. So I think that in this imaginative way of thinking about concrete functions within such a department, I think you can get a clue of what we're heading at, what we're aiming for.
And I know you pay a lot of attention to new job positions and designations that come up every day. So I'm wondering, are you suggesting in a way, when I say you, I mean your group and the Department of Civil Imagination, that these positions are actually eventually created inside institutions? Or is it a different, more poetic, more political suggestion?
I think it's nice when poetry guides us, and it's also very nice when we realize that politics is all around us. We are political animals, and culture, for me, and you know that I cannot see culture without our democracy. I cannot see our political democracy without our cultural democracy. The truth is, for the project and for imagining these roles, yes, of course, it can look like something that is poetic, but it's something that can make us actually think of concrete things that need to happen, concrete things that need to be questioned within our organizations. And actually, some organizations, mainly in the US, have not these exact titles I just mentioned, but we do see these things happening. Director of diversity, or director of welcoming, or director of inclusion. These things start happening because the reality around where cultural organizations are inserted, especially those cultural organizations that hear, they listen, they don't just talk. Those cultural organizations that listen and are aware of what's happening around them, they realize they had to reconsider the way they do things. And these are actually there are titles similar to these ones that are actually part of structures now in certain organizations. So it's becoming a reality. We have something poetic, but then poetry makes us do things.
You at least it seems to me that a lot of your provocations, poetic provocations, political provocations, are targeted at art institutions. That somehow that surprised me. I'm curious to know as to whether you think that's the main locus for change, or that's the most urgent angle, or I was going through the pages and where's government? Where are local authorities? And we're recording this in the framework of a political forum, and we are a few months away from local elections. And of course, that was not a topic, but I can't resist asking you whether this focus on institutions was intentional, and what does it mean if it was?
I can't really tell you if it was intentional for the group. For me, it certainly is. Again, the group, when we discuss care is not about only, within a certain cultural organization, or care between the organization and whoever is the government, etc. It has to do also with the larger communities in which cultural organizations are inserted. Now, if I can answer this on a more personal point of view, I think that in Portugal, and recently I've heard this a number of times, when we discuss issues that are really urgent, there's always somebody who will say, but there needs to be a political will for that to happen. And by political will, what's in our minds are the, let's say, professional politicians, people who are elected to be, but political will should come from all of us. And sometimes, because maybe certain structures are heavier, changes takes more time to happen. Perhaps the political will is that of each one of us in smaller organizations, closer to the, if I can say, grassroots movements, and should include, in my view, both cultural professionals, but also the people around them, the citizens around them, the communities around them. And perhaps we can define a way forward, a possible way forward. We can imagine a possible way forward, and then perhaps contaminate larger political, governmental organizations that might say, there's something here that we should pay attention to. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it's another take, and a very interesting one, that the authorities and governments in general become uncomfortable by new practices and more progressive practice that come along through intermediary organizations. Thanks. I'd love to know more, but I'm aware of time, so I'll move on to Marta. Marta, I know that you had a slightly different role in the project. You were a facilitator. I'd like to, well, the word itself is easier to understand than reshaper, but still I'd like you to, not so much, I'd like you to tell us what did you facilitate, and what was it like? And again, what were the challenges that you were met with?
Thank you so much, Vanya, for this question. Indeed, it's a really complex one, having in mind the complexity of the whole project. But I guess maybe what can help to understand what the experience of the facilitation in that particular reshape framework looked like is to maybe point out that several, as you said, challenges or also privileges of that role, so to speak. Because I guess the facilitation is an extremely difficult task, actually, and really challenging when it comes to understand better and what's the ground you're standing on. And you, in a way, you need to know the ground quite well in order to offer as much of security and as much of awareness, time, care to the one you work with. But then while thinking of the reshape and while designing the reshape, I guess none of us, and also none of us who took part in the project, could have even imagined the complexity of the ground that we tried to make our steps on. That's one thing. And then, of course, the pandemic shook it even stronger. So in a way, what I would perceive as one of the biggest challenges of being the facilitator within the framework of the reshape was indeed this task to build a common ground for a group that is so diverse. And by diversity, I mean different contexts and backgrounds we were all coming from. The group consisted of 8 reshapers, so to speak, of 8 participants and myself. And then there were really different contexts, different experiences, but also even different kind of dynamics of working and different kind of modes of working. So all of that made this whole situation extremely unique, because I guess we would have never, ever met otherwise. I mean, there were definitely at one table people who would have something in common easily in 1 second, and the others who might otherwise even maybe have difficulties in continuing the conversation over a coffee. And that was the biggest challenge and the most beautiful part of this project, definitely. And then I guess, so one of the tasks, one of the challenges was to indeed build a caring, safe, stable ground for the group to discuss and to meet in all of these diversities. That's one thing. The other, I guess, was an ability to actually take the time off that Maria talked so beautifully about. And I guess all of the participants, no matter whether we were reshapers, facilitators, so-called partners, organizers, coordinators of the projects, we all working in a field, maybe not all, but most of us, especially the freelancers, work in a very precarious field, which means that to take the time off to reflect seems a huge luxury, actually, and an extreme privilege. And on one side, that was definitely the most beautiful part of the project, and this opportunity that was a real gift to us all. On the other, it's been a constant struggle for the group, for myself, to be able to take this time off, so to kind of go out of the realm of the framework we operate in on the everyday basis, because of the working conditions, because of running after another project, because one need to pay one's bills and so on and so forth. And so this is probably what I would describe when it comes to the challenges. And when it comes to the privileges or to the joys of this project, I could probably list them for ages, but maybe I can pick here just one, which would be this ability to build a kind of supporting body within the group. And this, I guess, we experienced the most during the pandemic outbreak. That was a sudden experience for us all. And this opportunity to meet regularly, even if only online, since a year and a half, we meet each other only online. But having this opportunity to have regular meetings, to have these frameworks that the ones who can, they join, who can't, they don't join at this moment, they will come later, having this kind of freedom and having this kind of certainty that when you open this computer, that will always someone from the group be there to just discuss with you, how do you feel in this crisis of the pandemic? That was an enormous privilege. And that was, I guess, one of the strongest experiences that, at least from my personal perspective, helped me go through this difficult moment of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I hope I have enough time before the end to go to this issue of time that you are all referring to. I think it is very important. But you've come up with a manual on transnational and post-national practices. I'm very curious about it, but I'd ask you, please, if you can offer us a way to understand how did you differentiate what transnational and post-national stands for vis-a-vis the more often heard expression international, because I think that would be a very basic clarification and most certainly food for thought.
It's really fascinating to come back to the beginning of the process and to understand that actually within the group we kind of tried all the time, and this is the tendency we observed only at some point, all the time we kind of tried to escape from the task to define these notions. And I guess that came not only from this feeling of perplexity and of lots of doubts how to actually define it, or rather whether it makes sense to define it and whether it's even possible to define it, having in mind that in the group we do understand these terms from very different angles, because they are also very political, right? So they really depend on the context we operate within. But then we also realize that maybe we can not necessarily focus on the transpost-national, but rather use it as a kind of logic of working. So we decided that we would definitely not go, and we deliberately never use the term of the international, because we were pretty sure that we don't want the term of the nation state to be definitive for our reflection and our conversation. And therefore post and transnational are extremely helpful. But then there's of course a certain risk in going into the transnational and trying to imagine operating as if the national borders were not existing, especially having in mind that they're very material, and we, on our everyday basis, in the professional and personal lives, we need to somehow overcome different obstacles and borders that are created within the national ones. And the national borders do influence very concretely the way how we work, the mode of working, the context of our practices. So therefore, we tried to not to get kind of trapped within the existing map of Europe and the southern Mediterranean region. So not to follow the borders that exist already, but also not to pretend they don't exist and not to forget about the obstacles they might generate. And we tried to shift the logic somehow outside of these frames, or try to at least have a look from a different perspective on our current situation and try to define it within different terms, like for instance, the lenses of the connection, the lenses of the place. So try to go or to choose all the political dimension, the national, in order to understand better how can we actually also politically address them.
Okay, it seems a very smart decision, given that the world international carries so much attached to it, and so many misunderstandings, that it seems smart to get rid of it right away, right at the beginning, and maybe to reconsider it. I'd like to focus on the prototype, well, very briefly, but all these materials can be accessed online, and we will have links so that people can explore. But just like the others, you had to turn those ideas into an actionable format. And you came up with a set of tarot cards. Tell us about it.
We actually did, and it's actually one of the prototypes we created. The other is a kind of virtual exhibition. So we have two of them, and Manuel kind of bridges them, and is at least we hope it will serve as a guideline to go through both tarot cards and the virtual exhibition. And I'm underlining the presence of the virtual exhibition and the presence of the manual, not only because I find them extremely valuable, but also because I guess they do fulfill the task we kind of gave ourselves at the very beginning, which was understanding that actually the very process of work and the very, so to speak, trajectory that we went through within the frames of the project is the prototype by itself. Because indeed, it's really exceptional to meet at the table in this constellation and to work in this particular framework and to address all of these challenges and to address all the steps that we needed to take and to understand also all this uncertainty or open ends that were there on a table and were in a way part of the responsibility we needed to take. That was an extremely valuable lesson for, I guess, us all, in order to understand better how the transnational cooperation might look like, or might set certain conditions or draw a certain, let's say, context in order to actually appear. And I guess both the virtual exhibition and the tarot, and but also if you look at the manual and the language that is being used in the manual, which is completely written by the members of the group, it combines exactly as in the case of Maria's group, the poetic and the politics at the same time, and that's why also the tarot card. So we decided at some point to use this this tool, so to speak, in order to address very political questions, like, for instance, whom do you work with? Who do you invite to your work? If you travel, do you actually have time and space to understand where do you land? Is there any way that you can actually root your practice in a local context, and in that sense, gain a political agency? An actual political agency? How does the hypermobility influence you? What do you see while traveling? What you don't? And all of these questions, the very crucial ecological impact of the hypermobility, are extremely valuable, but also very difficult. They seem like these hyper objects that you don't even know how to address. And therefore, the tool of the cards that you can that offer you certain names and images. And then while reading them, you can actually start the conversation. While using this kind of fictional tool, you can actually try to, at least for a while, reset the framework in which you operate, or reshift or reshape your perspective in order to see things that you operate within on a daily basis from a slightly different angle. And then maybe from that perspective, you can see them either differently, or you can discover some elements that were not visible otherwise.
Anyway, I think that all of you, and even the other reshapers responsible for other prototypes, in having had that poetic approach, poetical and political approach, gave us a huge break from very dry reports, which we also need when we read through the same themes over and over again, and we need new stimulus, also intellectual and sensorial stimulus. So I praise you all for that. I would love to talk a bit more about hypermobility and ecology, which is something that I'm very interested in, but I can't, at least not for now, not before I move on to Aniko. And Aniko, we've had by now a fair insight into the process, so I'll probably try to focus more and more on project results. And in your case, it strikes me that your group managed to have, again, such a practical approach towards a gigantic issue, solidarity economies. You conceived a card game, which is a set of cards that is the basis for a workshop, right? I'll maybe start, oh, we can even see them. I'll maybe start right there, right with the end. What's in the cards? How do you play it? Who's it for? All those questions.
It's just so difficult to speak after these ladies because like thoughts are whirling in my mind and I want to react to everything that they have been saying, but I'm trying to limit myself. So it's very difficult to present it shortly. And yes, it's a very practical kind of toolbox. So our starting point was, this is the work of 3 of the reshapers within our trajectories, the solidarity economies. It's Doreen Tutikin from Lebanon. Now she lives in Athens, and she's a designer, and she made the design of this beautiful card. And Dorota Ogroczka, who is from Poland, and she's a drama teacher. And I'm also I'm an arts manager, but also a coach. So these 3 professions, I think, was a wonderful constellation of putting this together. And our starting point was, and I think it also comes from our reshape experience, how difficult it is to be in an international collaboration, to be shoved in a room, so many people, and get on with the project. This is your budget, this is your task, do it. And we very often experience, also coming from countries, all of us who are, let's say, not from the privileged ones, how difficult it is to sit by such a table and protect interests, for example, to understand where everybody comes from and what their motivations are, and how can we devise something which gives a platform to think about it before we actually get on with the project. Mm-hmm. And we came up with 33 conflicts, which are on these cards, very simple conflicts that would describe, mainly now in international collaborations, from our own experience, things that we also imagined. So very simple situations where one of the parties or even both parties would feel uneasy about something.
Can you give us an example of
oh
those
my
conflicts?
God, yes.
I was fascinated because it was a very high number of conflicts that you
we wanted to have a good selection, and we also, I mean, it's an open game, so anybody is very free to come up with their own conflicts from their history or from somebody's history. I put together 2 and I tried to find the shortest ones. Okay. All the conflicts are found on the Reshape website, actually, so anybody who is interested, they can read it. Hang on a minute. Your colleague is in charge of a presentation before an audience of potential funders or partners. It is a very important presentation, but the colleague makes a big mistake due to nervousness And this decreases the chances of obtaining the grant. So these are simple situations. We of course go for bigger ones. One of the team members suggests that the team pray together before each meeting. When the group protests, the team member takes offense. So we also didn't want to come up with conflicts where you decide that he is right, she is not, or he or she or it is, or whatever. So we don't have to talk about that, but there are values possibly compromised on each side. Mm-hmm. And very importantly, so there are the conflicts, and we also have a set of values. And these are, I put in the front my favorite ones. So it's a set of values borrowed from organizational development. And we thought that maybe it's good that such a team would talk about what values they would like to work with, or according to what values are important for the individuals and also for them as a group. Mm-hmm. So first we asked them to pick a value, explain why it's important for them. Then they go on to the fictional kind of land, and they discuss conflicts which are not their own conflicts. And because it's fictional, because it's not close to them, they can actually talk about a lot of personal things. We have had quite a few tests during spring, and there have been wonderful discussions and very deep ones and very personal ones. I tested the game with a collaboration that I'm working with now. It's an international partnership, and it was so good to learn, to get to know the people on a different level before we really get into the project.
I understand that you suggest that this cards, this workshop is made at the beginning of collaboration. Is that so?
That was our suggestion, yes, because we wanted to somehow ease that initial moment when so many things are decided, hierarchy is decided, like the hidden one, the underlying one, what Milica was talking about. And suddenly you find yourself somewhere where you may have not intended to be, like in positions in games, and how to ease that, how to talk about values before you talk about money. as simple as that. We wanted, it was important for us that we do a simple thing. Also within the RESHAPE, the whole project, it was a challenge. I wanted to talk about this because it wasn't mentioned, that what is the scope of that prototype that we offer? How big do we have to think? And it was so difficult to decide about that. And I think the three of us in the end decided we go simple, we go small, because that's what we understand. And that's where our competencies are. Mm-hmm. And maybe, and we have to start from there. Mm-hmm. And this,
you're completely in line with this idea of being political, no matter where you work and how big is your organization. But I can't resist to ask you whether you're in those discussions that seem to draw so much of your experience, because all the conflicts are very relatable for someone who has worked in a project framework, so they must be true. Have you managed also to reach any recommendations, say, that could be applicable to funding bodies, for instance, or did you intentionally not go there?
Well, within the card game, I don't think that was an intention, but what I think is how partners sit down at a table when you talk about your own personal values and how you get on with the work. It's not a position that you represent, it's yourself that you represent. And suddenly, big guys from British Council and those big guys from whoever, we sit together and we talk about personal values, what drives them in their work. And then we have a conversation. And then you don't have to feel intimidated for, you know, for things that are probably only in your head, but it exists there because you are socialized in that way. So that is like diminishing the borders or these boundaries between people. And I do believe that funders are partners as well. So,
okay.
and
completely clear.
Completely I mean,
clear.
I come from Hungary and it's a very special context right now. So it's funny that I say that, but I still believe it, that in theory that they are just people and we have a common goal, and they probably give the money and I do the work. And, you know, artists bring their ideas, but that's also a partnership. And we can actually talk about values if they are open to that. So, but I just wanted to go back. Maybe we don't have time, but Maria was saying about the director of wishful thinking and so on, that in the end of the game, we go back to the values, and because we imagine that this is a standing partnership, that everybody is going to take on a value that they will be the guardian of in the partnership. And that's where we come back to reality, that this is our partnership and I will take care of that. I will be the guardian of stability, or, you know, the minister of freedom. And then it's actually a role that you are gonna take on. And maybe it's a norm that you are setting up in the beginning of a collaboration, that these are the values that we are gonna respect no matter what. And that's very important in the end.
And Nico, it seems what you just said seems quite magically to add consistency to all your interventions. We're struggling with time as as expected, but still, I'd like to address at least one question for all of you, but a different one for Milica, coming back to that open-ended format. Because it was already my perspective, but hearing all of you, I have the impression that RESHAPE was not really only about these prototypes, but about the approach itself, the process. So in terms of future project designs, because we're always making some project ahead, what are the learning points that you think we can take from this approach and from this process that seems to have impacted everybody so much? What can we put in our next application?
I'll maybe start, and I'll just give a few ideas. For me, the openness and the adaptability of the project was crucial, and it was a matter of constant negotiation with a lot of different parties involved. And that's also because somehow when you are in a project like this, you also have to fit it in a tight framework, which is the reality of any project, but in particular a project involving so many actors and on this kind of transnational level. So there's not, the reality of the project management in general is that there is not a lot of openness and there's not a lot of adaptability, and what you need to produce are kind of outputs and outcomes, and and in a project like this, the only way that it can work is if it's open and adaptable. So this kind of constant negotiation and stretching the limits of what is actually acceptable in the tight framework that we have was quite a challenge, and is something to tackle, I think, well in advance, and to be negotiated before we get into the project, before everybody kind of steps in and start working. So that's probably one thing. And another thing is that the priority really needs to be on building the community. And by this, I mean making sure that each person involved, whatever their role may be, feels comfortable and in charge of the process, or at least having their say in the process. And again, that's where we come back to the issue of time, because it takes a tremendous amount of time for this to happen. And unfortunately, within RESHAPE, we just didn't have enough time for that. We were constantly running after tight schedules and tight, time frames that were imposed by this non-flexible framework.
Mm-hmm. Well, same here. I can't deny it. We're inserting this conversation into a broader initiative, so we have time constraints, but we'll have to reschedule because I have a lot of notes, things that I would like to ask you. I won't close without giving you all the floor again, whoever wants to jump in. And in a sense, on this issue of time, regarding the future, I'm very curious as to how optimistic about change in the future are you? I mean, during the pandemic, we navigated through different phases. At one time, it seemed that pretty much everyone recognized the need for change. The talk was about paradigm shift, and nothing stayed the same after COVID, and philosophers making big statements. But now with what seemed a huge mountain seems now, well, at least solvable through the vaccines. It seems to me that the urge to go back to normal started to look stronger than the urge to change. So as people that are in this project reaching the end, how optimistic are you about the possibilities of change that you've put so much effort into? Whoever wants to jump in at this point, we're really closing. So, and if everybody wants to talk, I'd be glad.
I think change, imagining the change or imagining a different word is just one thing. In coaching, we talk a lot about change management, that how do you actually carry it through? Because change is tiresome. I mean, that you don't do your own practices and you always have to, imagine and then adapt your practices. And there is a huge drawing of the route that we are used to. So I think all this, what we imagined in RESHAPE, it would be so interesting as a second step to imagine that how do we carry it through? What are those? What are the limitations of it? Who can make it possible? What can make it possible? What do we need to make it possible? So it also change has a very practical side to it. After we dreamt it, we have to deliver. Or
if I may add to what Aniko just said, I think it's a question of scale as well, so that we don't go crazy about things. And I'm not optimistic about the world. I'm very optimistic about many small worlds. And then if we take a step backwards and look at the world from a bigger distance, then we can see the change. When we're too close to it, it doesn't seem like it's a change, but it is actually happening. And at least some of us will need to be a bit more stubborn and actually work for that change.
I very much agree with Maria that it's very much about the scale, and it's very much about the perspective you take or the lenses through which you decide to look at it. But I'm also thinking a lot about in a way, scaling down is also about probably going a little bit aside or shifting from big ideas to the everyday practices. So kind of this kind of everyday constant routine of practicing what we have written and what we have designed. And I wonder, how is that possible, or rather, how much did we get used already to that practice during the RESHAPE, and how much of a strength and how much of an inspiration we can have still to put it forward, to bring it further, to share it and influence on the others who had not a chance to be with us within the project.
Wow. Anyone else? No, Melissa?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add, when you look at all the prototypes together as a part of the results that are coming out of this, they are very different. Huh? They are very diverse. Some of them are very concrete and some of them are more reflective and so on. But as you could hear now, all of them are to a certain extent based on poetry and on the poetic, and all of them are based on playfulness. And all of them are based also on this trust in the small scale individual action. And I don't know if I'm optimistic, and I guess people that know me would kind of be surprised if they would hear me say, that I was optimistic. But I am hopeful. I am hopeful that, and this hope is partly given to me by these reflections, by these proposals, by the prototypes, because they do reaffirm that by the poetic and the playful and the small scale action, certain things are possible, and even, coming. So I guess that's where my hope and maybe my optimism lies.
Well, thank you all. It has been a real pleasure for me. And I think you've mentioned stubbornness and inspiration as basic ingredients to move on. Thank you very much.